So, in terms of turn value lines, we're going to have to start thinking about more. Once we see about the flop, right, we have our value range of either top pair or middle pair, and now we have to decide whether or not we're going to be wanting to value bet the turn. I know this sounds kind of maybe too oversimplified, but we really can only bet the turn for value when our opponent will call us with worse hands. Alright? And, you know, if we had bet the flop with middle pair, right, and because we thought we were ahead of his calling range, we probably still are ahead of his calling range from the flop, but if we bet again on the turn with that same hand and he won't call us with the worst hand, then in reality, we really can't be betting. So, turn, we can still be betting hands like middle pair, top kicker, especially on drawy boards. And the other thing is we can also be betting hands on the turn that we checked behind on the flop with for value. Let's say we check behind ace king, right? And the board on the flop was like 10-10-5, and the turn was like the 4 of spades, something like that. It brought a flush draw out there. Maybe even it was like the 9 and brought a bunch of straight draws out there. We can actually value bet like an ace high in that scenario because our opponent's going to be calling us with just a lot of draws and isn't likely to have a lot of pairs in his hand range. We know that because if he did have a pair, he probably would value bet us on that same board. So we can value bet ace high. We can value bet maybe bottom pair like on a drawy board on the next street. We don't want to be betting very large though. And most of the time when we're betting in heads up, we want to be keeping the pot small because most of the time we have absolute garbage. Okay, and so we want to keep our profitability of all the lines that we make very low by keeping the bets and pot size small. Clearly, top pair, any kicker on the turn is still going to be a value bet in most scenarios. Having a hard time coming up with a scenario when it's not a value bet, although I'm sure I could find one if I stared hard enough. And the reason why we bet there is more or less what happens on the river. When I took that slide out, we're going to go over what happens when we check behind here in a little bit. But first, let's go into two barreling. You know, it's very similar to what happens in 6-max and full ring. We can barrel scare cards, as in like a queen, king, or ace coming off on the turn. It especially helps when our opponent is weak. Against a knowledgeable opponent, he's going to know that we're going to be barreling the scare cards, so we don't have to be. Maybe we don't have to barrel those cards either. Another reason we can be bluffing the turn again is if we either have improved to an 8-out draw or we continue to have one. Let's say we flopped a flush draw. Flopping a flush draw, flopping open and straight draw usually gives you license to 2-barrel. Same thing if you turn the flush draw, you turn an open and straight draw. So like let's say you see at the flop with the backdoor flush draw, you turn the flush draw and then you decide to 2-barrel again. That's usually a pretty opportunity to. Because we have equity in the pot, and we have a chance of winning it on the river if we do get called. So I would say avoid like barreling when you have little to no chance of winning, like on the river, unless it's a scare card, right? Unless we hit an 8-out draw, then I would keep barreling. But otherwise, if we have jack high and we flop as ace 8-2, we get check called, and then the turn is a 5. And in all reality, it didn't help us out at all. We probably shouldn't be spewing there and firing 2-barrels. So I say this a lot, but whenever you guys are bluffing and you guys have little to no equity, it really is spew most of the time. So now let's go into turn checking. This, in my opinion, is one of the most complex and, I guess, thought-provoking options or opportunities we're going to talk about today in the heads up, and that's really what do we represent when we check the turn, and really check any street, but checking the turn especially. All right, and then what happens on the river, and it's going to depend on the opponent as well. But the decision to check the turn is highly related to what we expect to do on the river. When we check the turn, there's only going to be 4 opportunities or 4 possibilities that are going to come up, right? Our opponent's going to be betting into us, or he's going to check to us. And in each instance, we have opportunity to either fold or call when bet into, or bet or check when bet in, or when check to. And I guess we could also option like raising when bet into, but we're not going to be covering any kind of river raise bluffing and whatnot in this lecture. So we're going to stick to our standard range for right now. So let's go on here.